Welcome to the Modern CPA Success Show, the podcast dedicated to helping accounting firms stay ahead of the curve. Our mission is to provide you with the latest and greatest insights on cutting-edge tools, innovative marketing strategies, virtual CFO services, and alternative billing methods. Join us as we change the way people think about accounting.
All right, we have got a really good episode for you today. Carol Bowser, and we're going to talk about conflict resolution. So it's a topic that I think a lot of people have interest in. Probably a lot of people think I'm not good at this. And what you're going to hear from her is the impact that it can have on a workplace, some things to look for, how to have a healthy environment. We'll talk about remote work that's in there. She'll give some tips. She does mention another one of our podcasts that somewhat relates to this. John Baldino is the founder and CEO of Humoriso. That's a recent podcast that she'll mention. So when you hear her say you guys talk to an outsourced HR rep, that's who she was talking about. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. Okay, welcome to this episode of the Modern CPA Success Show. I'm Tom Waddleton. I'm with the Summit Virtual CFO by Anders. I do the virtual CFO role and have about 15 clients or so where I act in the capacity of business consultant with them. Our topic today is something really important as we talk about conflict resolution. Probably most people would say, I don't like it, I avoided everything, yet it happens everywhere. We've got a fantastic guest. Carol Bowser is the founder of Conflict Management Strategies. She's a self-described recovering employment law attorney, also a mediator with U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Carol, welcome today.
Well, thank you so much. It's so excited to be here.
I would love to hear the story of how do you go from lawyer dealing with mediation and lawsuits and then say, okay, maybe there's a different way in starting your own company to do something. It sounds like not using all legal means to get everything resolved.
Well, always using legal means to get stuff.
Okay. Doing it legally, but not in court. Maybe is how I'm thinking
exactly.
Of it. Yeah.
So it's like most origin stories. There's always a little bit of a winding path. And before I went to law school, I had some employment experiences as an employee. And I thought, well, had I known what my rights and responsibilities were in that circumstance, would I have made the same decisions? Maybe yeah, maybe no. Had I known what the employer's rights and responsibilities were in that relationship, would I have made the same decisions? Absolutely not. So I thought about, well, where do you learn about rights and responsibilities? Well, you learn about rights and responsibilities by going to law school and also being the daughter of a lawyer and growing up around family friends who are lawyers. It's almost kind of like going into the family business, even though there wasn't a family lawyer business. And so prior to making the jump to go to law school and really kind of interested in the employment area, I was thinking about, well, how much, control did I want to have? How could I have had conversations? What choices did I want to make? And at that point in time, there was a movement kind of within the legal community talking more about mediation as an alternate way to be able to solve disputes. And what really spoke to me about that is having a voice in creating the solution and also recognizing that it's my life and there are certain things that I did and I didn't do, how I reacted or how I didn't react, that kind of created the circumstance that was a pain point for me. And that aligned with kind of the mediation of not taking a dispute to a judge or to an arbiter, but being actively involved in that. So before I went to law school, I took training from a community-based mediation center, and it really resonated with me. And as a side note, from that time until this time, there are so many lawyers who take mediation training. I often joke where, I live in Western Washington or in like some of the major metropolitan areas. You could throw a dead cat and hit many lawyers who want to be mediators, because I think the mediation profession is much more professionally fulfilling. At least for me, it was, and it's less competitive, less stressful. And also, I think you have a higher degree of client satisfaction, because I think, like some of the work that you do, with your clients, and even like I think some CPAs, it's an investigative process of how do people work, what's important to them, how do they want to be able to comply or not comply with some of the rules, and how do you help people be successful at work. And that's kind of the path that I took to eventually kind of create conflict management strategies, where for a while I was a contract mediator for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and now I help organizations of all sizes and all ilks either prevent or address workplace conflict.
That's a great story. I don't think I had really thought about if things are getting resolved in court. There's probably a lot high incidence of nobody's happy after that's done, or at least
Oh,
not as
yeah.
happy as they thought, that as opposed to mediation where your role is really trying to get to a good solution versus you're wanting to win. If you're on one side as a lawyer, right, you're just trying to win for your client.
Correct. And, one little factoid about the legal system, the vast majority of lawsuits are resolved prior to going to trial. And
Mm,
most jurisdictions require parties to attempt mediation. And my focus was less on the litigated matter, more on the workplace, because we spend too much time of our life and energy at work for it to be a difficult place to be. So being able to help people build their conflict resolution skills to deploy at work and maybe even in their own life.
okay. What I'm curious, in workplaces, if you think of all workplaces, general themes of where the conflict is coming up that isn't getting dealt with appropriately. I, do you have categories or something where you're saying this happens everywhere and we don't address it
It
once?
it happens it happens absolutely everywhere, and I think my big theme is that in some
Mm,
way, shape, or form, people aren't feeling successful at work, that they feel a system or a process or a person
mm,
or an approach or a tone of conversation is making them not feel successful. And because work is how we feed our family, how we keep a roof over our head, for the vast majority of Americans, it's how you get access to healthcare. And
mm,
it we spend too much time of our life and maybe even our identity within work and in those working relationships, and we feel as though a system or process, but more likely a person or that person's approach, is causing us detriment or stress or pain or frustration. That's where the conflict comes in.
mm. That makes a lot of sense. Do you think many people also think that it is not their responsibility to engage and resolve that, as opposed to, I just wish it wasn't here, or somehow I can go talk to Carol and she'll hear me and make me feel better, but I'm not doing a thing to fix this?
Well, I'm going to give you a great lawyer, mediator, consultant answer. It depends. Um,
Okay.
so in part, I think maybe people don't have a skill set, or maybe they have a
Hmm.
particular skill set that they overly rely on. And then sometimes I also find that maybe a manager or a directing partner or a supervisor, that they they have tried to resolve it on their own, but maybe they don't have the decision making authority. And people in a higher decision
Mm,
making authority will say, "Well, I hired smart, intelligent people. Act like an adult and figure it out on their own." And I always
mm,
ask, "Well, if they could figure it out on their own, don't you think they would have?" Um, and sometimes I think it's a conflict among, like, well, whose actual responsibility is it? Um,
mm,
to be able to do it. And I think that that's a lot of, well, they need to stop acting like this. The manager needs to step up. Somebody's afraid of conflict. So they're, continuing this to go in. Maybe they want to be liked. And so they're not having hard conversations. So I think it's a little bit of a combination of everything, that, well, maybe that the skill sets don't work, and maybe we had the skill set that worked in person in the office where we could take a moment of, like, hey, can I talk to you in the hallway? And that's, particularly on virtual and remote and distributed teams, that's not really happening anymore.
mm.
So
Yeah.
maybe the manager or maybe the conflict resolution skills were more in person dependent than we really realized. So it's a different skill set, a
Mm,
different muscle to develop.
interesting. So you mentioned the remote. What are you seeing as differences? And that seems like an obvious one, that in an office, I might pass by you in the hallway and just get a nonverbal cue that something's wrong that I wouldn't see in a remote environment. But I'm curious kind of what you're seeing now that more people are remote in remote companies. What's different about conflict in that area?
So, a couple of different things. First, I've seen several different, you know, organizations, and I've seen it enough to go, like, okay, this is a theme where people
Hmm.
were hired in the pandemic and maybe the systems or the processes were set up for in office. So the
Mm,
onboarding of getting to know you, and, like, not just getting to know your name, but kind of getting to know how you work, being able to establish trust, being able to establish rapport, that we
mhm,
relied on those in-person pieces. And now everyone is distributed and we're only seeing them through a video, and then it might only be that we're meeting periodically and we're not really kind of getting an opportunity to get to know one another. And I've seen
mhm,
it where I will ask, well, they said, well, we're not gelling as a team. We've got this team conflict. And my go-to question nowadays is, well, was the team ever cohesive? And they go,
Oh,
huh. And it's like, no, I don't think it was. I think we were so busy surviving and triaging to be able to survive and get the work done that we really didn't develop any kind of process, protocols. And I know,
mhm.
that your company talks a lot about kind of like the onboarding process and how
Right.
significant that is, and how we bring people in and we get them to look around and we get them to talk about, like, well, how do we solve conflict? How do we demonstrate teaming here? Kind of what's the culture? What's the expectations? And I think that was just um, so stuffed down to be able to get people to fill the position because we're so desperate to do that, or any of the systems were relying on in person. So I'm seeing
Mhm.
that a lot, that we really weren't cohesive, and that maybe there are new people coming in and they haven't developed kind of trust with their teammates. And so it's really hard to develop rapport if there isn't trust. So how much of
Mhm.
managers, supervisors, organizations have been saying, we need to carve time to start building the team cohesively, and it's not just about doing the work. So I'm seeing those types of things. And also, as I said, we're not having those little in between moments. That's not to say that we can't create those in between moments, but if we're doing meetings back to back to back to back to
Right.
back, that it's really difficult, one, to actually be able to do the work if we're in meetings all
Mhm.
of the time. And the second thing, I'll say, particularly for CPAs and some lawyers, past lawyers and stuff, the work is kind of heads down. You need time and quiet time to be able to focus on that. And for some people working remotely, this is the best thing ever. I
Right.
have a friend who is a big introvert, and when the pandemic, you started working remotely, I'm like, you have been training for this your whole life. Now everybody gets to be in your world. Uh, but it's really kind of difficult if we are used to it. So maybe folks ask, what were we relying on that we're not getting now? And that's just one,
Mhm.
and if we were relying on FaceTime in person to accomplish what, and what's a different way that we can accomplish this now? So it's a little
Yeah.
bit of feeling a little bit more isolated. The other piece, I think, especially for professions that really need a lot of heads down time, being I have seen this, as particularly with teams, and someone wants to reach out to you. It's like, Carol, they're never available. They're
Mm.
constantly out of office. And before, I would have been able to swing by or get in touch with them. And now I can't. So no one is ever available. So it is really difficult. So all concerns then may pop up during Zoom meetings, or people just say, I'm not going to worry about it now. It'll get later. And then all of a sudden, the later plus the later plus the later, the small thing
Mm.
plus small thing plus small things end up becoming bigger things. So those are
Yeah.
kind of some trends that I'm seeing.
That's excellent.
Elevate your firm with a virtual CFO playbook, how to land $60,000 per year clients and provide a killer client experience. This comprehensive online series of modules provides you with the essential tools to create and deliver scalable VCFO services. Developed from Summit's successful approach, which propelled them from $500,000 to over $10 million in revenue in 10 years, this playbook will equip you with the skills to take your firm to the next level. Additionally, upon completion, you can receive 24 hours of CPE credit for the course. Ready to grow your firm? Enroll now at vcfoplaybook.summitcpa.net.
I can tell you a couple of things that we do, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on things you think we could be doing more or better. So we often talk about, so many companies, as you know, have gone remote as a result of
Yep.
the pandemic. Many then did not focus at all on how their culture might need to be different or be built differently. So
Yeah.
one of the things we talk about is, okay, you really do have to focus on that. We'll do things like every Monday morning, we have an all team meeting. So 75 people or so that are part of our virtual CFO practice. It includes someone's got a joke of the day, someone's got a fun fact, but there's also just an open question. This week had to do with, I think it was someone talking about travel that they had, like places where you're going and travel, and people can just chip in and give answers for that. But it's a chance for people to get to know each other. Another really big one for us is when we're in meetings, the cameras are on. And if you're in a meeting without your camera, usually someone will say something about that, because what we found is people are more engaged, but just seeing people is a different interaction than just being online. And I've talked to several people. My kids are all remote workers and none of them do cameras on in meetings. And I said, that's just so different. And they'll acknowledge, they'll sit and work and they'll listen to the meeting and participate if they need to. But I'll just say, you're not really engaged in that conversation. It's just sort of radio is what it sounds like on the side.
Yeah, I would say that, the idea of let's take a minute to be able to make those little connections that start treating
Yeah.
people as kind of human beings and not just human doings, that those are great, and recognize that this is an opportunity that for us to be able to build culture. And we're taking some time at the meeting to be able to do that in a way that that allows us to get to know each other as people. And I'll make a little kind of caveat is some people who are get stuff done people. Let's get it done. Let's
Sure.
focus. What's the objective? They might find that excruciating. However, just saying, as a culture, this is how we're reinforcing the culture, because some people really value this and we want to get to know each other as colleagues, and not just through titles. I think that's really great. And it sounds like the being on camera is a way of supporting that. And there's lots of different opinions. And I will tell you why I think this camera versus no camera is an important discussion to have. Because there are some people who are neurodivergent, and it just is kind of overwhelming to have so many different pieces. There are some people who are like, I had a bad hair day, or whatever it is, and they feel a little bit more comfortable with that. However, I do think for a lot of people, if you're talking to a blank screen, it feels like, okay, the internal dialogue is anybody listening? Does anybody care? I'm not getting some of the signals that people are engaged at all. And for some people, talking in groups is challenging, and then feeling as though you're talking to a blank screen is weird. And also, I have heard people, when conflict arises, is like, I'm trying to have a meeting with them and I don't know how they're reacting to this. It's just kind of silence, or all I'm getting is words. And I've relied on seeing facial expressions to give me some clues that I relied on for kind of my emotional intelligence. How am I reading the room? How am I reading people's emotions? How do I adapt to this? Are people uncomfortable? And that takes a data point away. However, when you were talking about your kids, what I heard was, oh, they see their role in the meeting as very different, not like an active participant, but that the meeting is just, for lack of a better term, an information dump, that I am there as a recipient of information, and my role isn't that of active participant or presenter or kind of collaborative team member. It's more like I'm only going to pop up if I feel the need to do it, versus, how are we structuring the meeting so that way most people feel engaged. Because there are some people, and I'm sure everyone can identify who they are, and I might be one of them, who like to take up a lot of airtime. And so they might say, well, I don't need to talk. I don't want to talk. And I'm just going to kind of retreat into the background. That can be some problems.
That's a great point. And I think you're right for my kids. I think that is, they're younger in their careers, and it probably is feeling like it's information only. And they might be right. It may also be that someone's wanting more participation than what they're getting from the audience they have.
Yeah.
So if you're with someone who's saying, okay, I want to improve these skills, I'd be in that category, right? Generally like to avoid conflict. Luckily, I know it. And so I'm like, okay, you're avoiding this conversation, you need to get in there and do it. As you train people, what are some of the key things that you talk to people about to try to get better and recognize they need to improve this?
Excellent. So first and foremost, I want them to know that, I do this for a living. It sounds like you do a fair amount of, lean in conversations with staff, with clients, maybe with vendors. Is nobody ever gets 100% so comfortable, like, yeah, let's go having this conversation. Yes. It's like, no. And just because there's a discomfort or maybe a nervousness about it, that's just kind of your nervous system saying, hey, this is important. And I'm kind of recognizing the importance of it, and your body is telling you that it's important. important. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean don't do it. It's probably an indication that you do need to do it, and don't let that "I'm not completely comfortable" stop you from doing it, because no one's completely comfortable. The other thing that I will say is, when it you know when in in conflict, people are just really kind of nervous about how the other person is going to react to the news.
Hmm.
So just recognize that part of it is appreciating that if people have a reaction to it, you can just say, acknowledge the emotion in the room. Maybe yours, like, hey, I want to be able to share something with you. It might be I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable with it, and I'm really interested in what you have to say and feel about it. So the other is kind of recognize and acknowledge the emotional climate in the room, so that
Hmm.
way it's not just facts, it's not just data, because conflict is emotion. And um, and being able to kind of recognize the emotion is there. But I also talk about, when it's conflict, that we have to address through a screen. A couple of different things. One, how well do you know your people? How well
Hmm.
do you know kind of
Uh-huh.
what their little picadillos are, or what their preferences are? So, as a manager, or even, if you're, a CPA and having to work with the support staff or other CPAs, like, how well do you know them?
Hmm.
How much do they really value autonomy? How much do they really want you to kind of get to the point? So there's little data pieces of information that you can use, that you can structure the conversation. And I always say, like, if you have a goal of the conversation, let people know what the goal of the conversation is, so that
Hmm.
way they're not trying to figure it out in a vacuum. And
Okay.
then why you need to know the people is, like, have they changed how they're approaching it? I mean, are they less accessible
Mm.
than they were before? Did they used to talk a lot and now they aren't talking? Is it that we're seeing, lots of offline conversations or chat going on, where we're really not talking to who we need to be talking to? Those types of things. But you need to have, hopefully start having, informal conversations to get to know people, and even on the team, of, like, you know when you've had to have a difficult conversation, how did you approach it? So that way you can recognize when they're trying to approach you for a difficult conversation. Like, well, how many times? And so it's a little bit of a learning process. So that way you're recognizing how everybody approaches the conflict. Also, the little thing is, how many times are people reaching out to you to talk to you if they want to talk to you about something?
Mm.
Once, twice, 3 times? How often are you rescheduling something? How often?
Okay.
Because if you if you um, if you can't make yourself available, then it's like, "Well, I tried, and they never got back to me. I tried again, and they never got back to me." So it's like, you say
Sure.
you've got, an open door or an open screen, or you're always open, but you're never available. So I think you don't want to put up a barrier, because the screen, again, can cause, a little bit of a barrier for people to get access.
Yeah.
The flip side is, maybe there's too much access.
Mm.
Maybe people are just, on the screen all of the time, talking about stuff and not letting others get the work done. But it also kind of goes to, what are people's expectations of, how and when we can and should bring things up. And I think that that's kind of, the leader's role. And if you're the CPA, how you feel about conflict, how you feel about in person, how you feel about remote, you are setting the culture for that team. And, just kind of being aware of your own biases and how you're utilizing the screen. I think that self-awareness is really key.
Yeah. I like your description of really thinking carefully about things and not taking just that one data point. I was in a client leadership team meeting recently, and it was interesting. The one person was complaining, and the woman's name was Tamika. And it started off that we should be firing Tamika because she is dumping all of her work on me, and she gave some really bad behaviors. Into a point that you had made, Carol, the owner of the company said, "Has she always been like that?" And she said, "No, this has been like in the last 3 weeks." He said, "Why don't you take her out to lunch and just say, hey, I'm noticing a difference. Is something going on?" And even the person who was doing the accusing, her tone changed dramatically. That was, "You're right. I wonder if something's going on, because she used to be so good and now she's not." And to your point, I just found it interesting in the span of about 5 minutes, she pivoted from we should be firing this person to I should probably check in and see what's going on with her because of the change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to highlight kind of two different points here. Notice the labeling and the blaming and the shaming that's going on.
Yes.
And so when you hear that, that's conflict. And what I also go back to, like, kind of the first point of that is someone saying, I feel Tamika is impeding my success at work. And so it's
Okay.
like, oh, okay. And then so when I also hear about complaints about workloads or how stuff is done, I think that that's a really big piece too. And I've always said a complaint is nothing more than a request in disguise. So if we're hearing
Hmm.
complaints, kind of what's the underlying request that people are having? And isn't it interesting that that this one person probably had a complaint about Tamika, and then
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden they went to solution jumping of, I don't know, this is how I see my problem getting solved, off with their
Right.
head,
Yes.
versus being able to say, kind of what's changed. And we kind of go from a blaming and shaming to a curiosity mindset. And
Mm-hmm.
just being able to say, okay, that's really, And all of a sudden we have people um, going from treating their assumptions as facts and then making proposals on that to like, okay, well, what's kind of changed? Has there, and that's kind of a mediator tool of a curiosity question of, was there a time where things are working more smoothly? And so, yeah, it's like, oh, okay, great. Then we've got a little bit of a positive history to work on. What's changed? And who knows, there might have been a system or a process change that Tamika is struggling with,
Mm-hmm.
or it might be that someone was talking with Tamika and she felt as though she had more autonomy to change what she did, how she did it, the timeline to do it. Or it might be there's like, a family issue that's going on, or
Sure.
something where people are, have, maybe a right to, or need to be having some discussion of, I need to be able to take some time off for like family medical leave. And I'm just harkening back to a prior podcast that you had, and you were talking with, I think, an HR outsourcing piece, which was a
Yes.
great episode. I really,
Good.
really love that,
Thank you.
and I'm harkening back to when you're talking about, well, maybe FMLA leave, and the person said that the client said, well, I only want to give them 6 leaves, and like, well, that's nice. However, the law does require 12. So a little bit of that kind of situational awareness of being able to ask people questions about, did it work at one point in time? What do you think is impeding it? Do you think it's a technology issue? Are people switching how they have done work? Is there a communication issue? Like, for example, if this happened before, were you able to, like, pick up a phone and talk to Tamika, and now we don't have direct phone lines anymore? We're just relying on technology. And I'll give you another little funny kind of example of how different generations might approach remote work. I
Mm-hmm.
just worked with a state agency, and they still call it teleworking. And
Oh,
the and the
that's
dir-
years ago.
and one of the people said, you know what? I think that I'm still calling it teleworking. So I am assuming that if someone has a problem or it's something urgent, that they are going to pick up the phone. And
Mm-hmm.
she's like, well, maybe even how I'm describing it is impacting my expectations of people. And that isn't that interesting, because I don't think many people call it teleworking anymore. We call
Right.
it remote work, and it is a little bit of a generational thing of, and I think this also causes conflict of people now view telephone calls as interrupting their time, of
Mm,
someone saying, okay, now I need you and I'm going to interrupt your time,
right.
versus asynchronous work where I can get back to you when it's convenient for me. And I think that's uh, more prevalent on maybe global teams or teams that regularly work across many, many different time zones. And also, I'll point out that maybe some of the issues might be more people who are kind of salary based, or kind of have those exceptions to the Fair Labor Standards Act, where like, hey, we work until the job gets done, versus like, maybe are you working with folks who are more hourly employees and subject to more regulated working environments? Well, how does the virtual environment then work for them? Are we having the same expectations on them? Which, by the way, former employment lawyer here, are you setting yourself up for some risk management issues because you're thinking that because people have the potential to be accessible all the time for virtual things, that they are accessible all of the time, and then we have the problem of people can never unplug.
Okay. I'd love to tell you a couple things that we have done to, I think, make people more comfortable with conflict and also giving constructive feedback. And I'd love to hear if you think that those are good practices, maybe more that we
Yeah.
should be doing, things like that. So I'll tell you two quick stories that to me showed the need for this. That when I first started with the company, I started in January. In the leadership team, someone said, "Hey, we had a problem over Christmas because there were a couple people who were not available because they were on vacation. We had some client problems.
Mhm.
HR director, would you please announce to the whole team that when you're out on vacation, you need to make everyone aware?" And that was accepted.
Okay.
So a little bit later, it came back that that kind of request within a few months was, you know what, you're talking about two people. Go talk to those people, because at the staff meeting, they may have heard that and thought, yep, that's a great idea. They're not talking to
Uh-huh.
me. The other was we had a couple of employees who we had to let go, and the employee said, this is really the first time I heard about these performance problems. And so now there's a general feeling of we need to be telling people. You may remember from when we onboard employees, every 2 weeks, we're giving updates. And I've been with some of our younger team members where I've said, behind the scenes, you were telling me that Carol was struggling a little bit. And then I was in the meeting with you where you told her she was doing a great job.
Oh,
You're not
okay.
helping her out.
Okay.
She needs to know that that's where this is. And so those are two things. And then from a training standpoint, we took the leadership team through the Radical Candor book and some exercise where people kind of put themselves on the grid and things like that. But
Mhm.
I think the two expectations around have the conversation and the constructive feedback have been helpful to make it a little better. And I would say our owners and leaders, I think, demonstrate a really good job of they'll jump in and have that constructive
Yeah.
conversation comfortably.
So yeah, a couple of things I think are doing really good. One, for the vacation, aspect, it's like if that
Mhm.
is an expectation, because of customer service, because of the nature of the industry that are going on, being able to say the expectation, and it's like, well, we want you to be able to take time off, but sometimes there are critical times where where we need to get in touch with you because we aren't equipped to be able to have like a triage team jump in, and that you be the connection. So one, being able to establish the guideline there, that's
Yep.
really good. However, if you are managing by suggestion, kind of like
Mm.
all of a sudden we're making a rule because we're not giving feedback to two people, that's not great, and it starts coming across as really kind of autocratic. But it's a subtle way. If we want to say this is the expectation for everyone, and reminding people of what the expectation is,
Mhm.
great, everybody needs a refresher. However, there does need to be the one-on-one conversation then, because I have heard it over and over again, Carol, like if you're doing a training or whatever, that the person who needs to hear it isn't there, or they're not
Ah.
getting it, or they think that there is a rational, completely logical explanation of why that rule didn't apply to them at that point in
Mhm.
time. Um, and that's not good. So being able to say this is what the expectation was, you're not meeting the expectation, and regardless of what the completely rational, and there are two different things. Was there a completely rational way? You're like, oh yeah, that really made sense. We need to kind of bring that back to the team to kind of understand more context. Or it's like, no, that's really a non-negotiable piece, and in the future we
Mhm.
need to not happen again. One of the other items is that, yeah, you can't necessarily, I mean, it's good. Praise in public, great. And whether you do that virtually or whatever, that is a fantastic thing. Counsel in
Sure.
private. However,
Mm.
are you giving inconsistent messages? And so people will tend, and I also say, like, if someone's doing something wrong, don't pull back every single thing, any type of acknowledgement of something they're doing right,
Mm.
because then it's a cycle of the only feedback I'm getting is negative, negative, negative. I can't please them. I don't seem to be doing anything right. So what we can say is, this needs work. This is a deficit. This expectation of how it's being done is not being met. We do see that you're doing other things well. However, this this what you're not doing well is undermining the other pieces. So I need
Mm,
for you to continue doing those things well, and I really need for you to focus on this and know that this is a concern. You don't want to do it in public, and I think that's one of the
sure.
disadvantages, that if we're only getting people together in group settings in front of a camera or not a camera, people want to be efficient with the time. So they may take the opportunity to say, hey, I didn't really like the way that this went. You need to
Mm,
be doing better, or let's talk about this in front of this entire audience. Not
sure.
being good. It could be, hey, there's something I want to talk to you about it. Let's set up a private meeting so we can spend a little bit more time talking about it. But I do think a lot of people take advantage of group settings, particularly if you're higher up in an organization where your time is, an organizational asset, and it's hard to get time with you.
Mhm.
People are going to try to take advantage of that, and they may start, criticizing in public forums, which is not good.
Yeah, that is not good. It is interesting when you think remote, though, because my guess is for some of those examples in an office environment, it may have been walking down the hall with people and you could bump into them and give that same kind of feedback in a private setting that felt less
Hmm.
formal. And remote, I think, can feel more formal, especially if I say, hey, Carol, can I set up some time? I've got some feedback for you for something that can make it seem more formal. It doesn't mean you
Yeah.
shouldn't do it and shouldn't be prepared to do it, but it isn't quite the just bump into someone and have that conversation.
Correct. And I think I really love it when I hear leaders and people saying, I have a weekly, one-on-one or a bi-weekly
Hmm.
one-on-one with people. So that way you have kind of developed a process of, we have time to be able to talk about these things. And it can be good things, it can be bad things, but it's not like a dun, 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 I need to talk
Yes.
to you, come to the principal's office, because that's not good. And I have
Yeah.
found that if people feel defensive, they may either be really, really, assertive, going to aggressive, or they're going to completely withdraw. And it's easy to withdraw. Yeah, that's right. Okay. All
Mm.
right. Yeah, I'll do that. Particularly in a screen. And, if they shut down that camera, then it's really hard for people giving the feedback to engage in a conversation, because all feedback should be a conversation, because you may be having some assumptions, or you maybe have bought into the label of what's going on, or
Mhm.
one person's version of it. And I think that's really hard. I hear a lot of people complain. It's like, they only talked to one person and took that person's version as fact, and then confronted me with it, which isn't good. If we approach it from a curiosity and try to look at,
Mhm.
how, if you think about it, how could a decent, reasonable person who we screened and invited into this organization, you know, conduct themselves that way? Maybe that's a little bit more of a curiosity question that kind of opens you up um, to hear what they have to say, and that feeling heard, feeling seen, starting to have the conversation. That's where the conflict resolution comes, and that's where the trust comes, because sometimes it's like you have to work through things and the relationship to get stronger. It's like working out a muscle. If you learn about
Mhm.
muscles, how we get them stronger is we work them past their kind of current comfort level. It creates little micro tears in the muscle, and then
Mhm.
in healing it makes the muscle stronger. It's a little bit through, like, how are we working through things? And so maybe even for the team, asking the question of, we work in a virtual environment, how do we want to be able to work through these? If we have a concern, if we have a conflict, what has worked well in the past, and we focus on what was working well, and okay, so how do we replicate that?
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple times really looking beneath the surface and understanding things, which looks very much like this is really an investment in the relationship to do it well because it's going to be stronger after you've done it, versus this can be just a really quick that my job is just to get these three sentences out about here's where you could have done better and then run off after that. And you can
Yeah,
see how the former is so much better to say my goal is that you're going to improve as employer, relationships better, this conflict's behind us, so let's spend some time
exactly.
doing it.
Exactly. And you find that most people with conflict, they want someone to start doing something or stop doing something. And it's usually all about the
Hmm.
other person needs to do that. So it's kind of
Of
like
course.
abdicating their power and control, but being able to say, okay, help me understand how this is an impediment to you. Help me understand how this is making you feel successful at work. Is it a system? Is it a process? Is it an approach? And if it comes from, help me understand what the impact is, then people can kind of tell their story. And, from that, you can, say, okay, Do we need to involve more people in this? Do I need to have other conversations? And then again, it's all about developing the relationship.
Mm. So if we turn attention a little bit toward your company, what's the typical engagement, if there is one, when you engage with a company? I'm guessing our listeners are thinking, okay, yes, I'm getting influence that I should be better at this, and I've gotten a few tips. But if someone's thinking about their own company and saying, I want some big improvements in this, what help do you usually give to companies?
So a couple of different things. I say that I help organizations either address or prevent workplace conflict, or sometimes I
Mhm.
say the sucking vortex of pissed off. I do it in a variety of ways. So when there can be professional development training, retreats all
Mhm.
about kind of skill building and gathering people. Sometimes it is coaching, sometimes facilitating work among a particular team, or sometimes it's mediating, if there's a particular relationship that goes difficult. So and sometimes it's like, hey Carol, we've got a person who we really value in the company, but there are some conflict resolution skills, how they're treating people, how they need to go from a peer to a supervisor, or start looking at a director level. Because to quote a friend of mine, it's as you go up the chain, you get to a certain point, unless you can inspire people, you'll be nothing less than mediocre. And as if
Mm.
you're owning a company and developing the company, how are you then empowering and leading not just the business but the people? So sometimes, as I said, sometimes it's a repeated engagements of training around communication and conflict resolution skills, and maybe a little bit of subtle things about getting them to talk to one another. And so it's a lot of different fun, because we talk about conflict resolution, and it's about work, it's about values,
Mhm.
it's about people's approach to conflict, it's about their relationship with conflict. Isn't that
Mhm.
interesting that we're all in some type of
Yeah,
relationship with conflict, and kind of uncovering and discovering that?
sure. I would guess in many cases you're coming in with the, I hired you to help fix this, and in the discussion, I have to deal with, I'm not doing things very well also. But I was hoping you'd come in and just get them in line.
Well, yes. And I
Yeah.
also, because the employment relationship, even if it's just one single person, they're in, I kind of call an environment or a climate. So there's something in that culture, that environment, and that climate that allowed whatever the concern was to grow and not be addressed.
Yeah.
So it's not just one person, it's also, what are the supervisory skills? What are the leadership skills? How does the team deal with conflict or not deal with
Mhm.
conflict? And sometimes it's like, fix this. And I often say, I'm a little bit like a midwife, meaning that I kind of know about the process. I know about what happens. I do this with a lot of different organizations, public, private, medical, education,
Mhm.
professional firms. And so I can bring a value to folks, because I can say, you're not alone in this. And I see this in a variety of places. But as a midwife, I can help, but I'm not the one doing the pushing. It's that it's not my business, it's not my life, it's not my conflict. And that's kind of what my mediator training taught me, is that, I am a neutral, I'm invested in trying to help people find success and develop a path. I help them define what success looks like, and then bring tools to be able to help them um, address the presenting issue, but then also develop those relationships, deploy skills as after I leave. Because it's, as I said, I'm the short-term relationship. The
Yeah.
employees and the vendors, and those who you want to invite in, that's the long-term relationship. And how you handle conflict or don't, how your people feel they're treated, that creates it's not just your brand, it's actually your reputation. So
Yeah.
that's what I would like to help businesses do, is develop internally a reputation for, this is how we do things here, and we do it appropriately, and we help everybody develop their conflict resolution skills, because they're life skills.
Yeah. That sounds like a great place for us to come to conclusion. Let me ask one last question. Anything that you would like to have covered or thought I should have asked that I didn't get to?
Oh, you took my question. I always ask that question for
Oh,
for
okay.
other for other people. So I do want to say that as leaders, again, you set the tone And people want to see you have a comfort for, addressing issues. And even if you don't think, quote unquote, it's not your job, they should be able to do it. They want to feel as though you are interested in it and not avoiding it. I think that's like a really big message, especially for owners and particularly for owners, in the who are supervising CPAs. It's like, people may go to get that professional credential, but it's how you work with the support staff. It's how you work with the other professionals that it is really crucial. And everybody wants to feel valued. So I think that developing those types of skills, that it's like, well, I'm just hired here to be a CPA. And at some magic moment, if you want to, become, a senior partner or develop a practice of your own, it's about people as well, not just the technical proficiencies.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point to make, that for the people listening, I know a lot of people are leading their firms or being leaders in their firms. To know that you're not doing this as well as you should and think that maybe it's not having an impact, I think is foolhardy. People are watching what you're doing. And I think that we do it well internally. If none of the leaders around are going to deal with conflict, how would you expect the people under them to care at all about how that's being done? They're going to see that.
Yeah. And I would think the other piece, if I didn't highlight it before, it's if you have, well-meaning, intelligent people who you have invited into the organization and they can't figure it out, it's not just, well, they need to be adults. It's that you have caring adults who have different professional backgrounds, different metrics, and different best practices based on their particular professional backgrounds that are telling them to go one particular way versus another. So that's when you as a leader can step in and say, I love your ability to be autonomous. I love your ability to be able to advocate for your position, but this is how I want it done here. This is my sandbox. This is the decision that I am making because it's impeding how the work is getting done. So this is where I need to step in and make a decision. So don't be afraid to make decisions.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. Well, thank you very much. If people want to get in touch with you, do you want to give us a couple things, and we will have in show notes different contact information also?
Absolutely. If they want to go to managingconflict.com, where there are some blogs and videos, and you can find a way to be able to get in touch with me if you've got questions or you want to share successes. Also, if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, several years ago, someone named me one of the top 30 people to follow on LinkedIn for conflict resolution, where again, I want to provide tips, tools, resources for people to strengthen their conflict resolution muscles. And so those are great ways. If you're an Instagram person, you can follow me there. If you're a Facebook person, you can follow me there. And you can also just, reach out if you've got a question or a concern, or if you think that you need some help in building up your conflict resolution competencies or your team's conflict resolution competencies. Because again, it's a skill set, and particularly the more you manage people, and people are messy.
Great way to close. Carol, thank you much. Thank you very much. This is really enjoyable.
You're welcome. I loved your questions.
Thank you.
Enjoy this podcast? Visit our website, summitcpa.net, to get more tips and strategy for achieving modern CPA firm success. We're here to be a resource in this ever-changing industry.